Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Holistic Human Optimization Show. As always, I'm your host, Ronnie Landis, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, someone that I'm very honored to spend this time with, and a woman who I've followed for almost, I want to say 6 or 7 years. And Dr. Cass, I actually first came across your work at the women's conference, the very first women's conference that our mutual friends and colleagues, David Wolf and Len Foley, put together many years ago. And before that, I wasn't familiar with your work, but I saw you speak, and I got a copy of one of your books, Natural Highs. And, I just have to say that is foundational. It's fantastic. And really just the nuances, the distinctions, and bringing in the information that about how to repair the brain, how to repair neurotransmitter production, how to heal the brain and the nervous system through natural supplements, getting away from pharmaceuticals and psychiatric type of medications and going the natural route. And I love that title, by the way, Natural Highs. And I think I've been saying that all over the place whenever I give talks or something, is like, people are always trying to get high because they want to feel high, but they're not necessarily doing it in a natural way. So I love that idea that you brought out, and that's what got me turned on to your work. And, I'm really excited to be here with you and jumping into the topics that we're going to talk about.
Well, thank you so much. My publisher was very resistant to that title. And I said, I'm going to do it anyway. I think it's a good one, because it was at a time when it was really not okay to get high. And I still think that, the quote, getting high thing is not really the issue. It's about sustaining a joyous mood, having control over your moods, not being swung by every single external event that happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is such an important distinction, something I want to unpack with you as we go forward. What I would love to do with you is maybe just get a little bit about your background and how you got into this field in the first place, because I tend to find that healers tend to have gone through a healing process, and that brings them into the healing work, or any work that we're called to do in the world. We tend to go through a bit of a process to get there. So I'm just curious, what compelled you and led you into the work that you do in the psychiatric field and just the different work that you're doing in the world?
Well, thanks for asking. I've always been interested in how the mind works and how the mind and body works. I mean, even in high school, college, I was curious. And I think the most interesting topic for being curious is the body and the brain, how we think, why we do what we do. So that led me to go to medical school and then to psychiatry. And in my psychiatric training, I actually had a lot of psychodynamic training. So it wasn't just all drugs, although currently psychiatric training is pretty much medication. For therapy, you go to a therapist. So that's unfortunate, because if somebody gets sent to a psychiatrist, if you're a hammer, everything's a nail. So you go to a psychiatrist, you get put on medication. So in terms of my own path, what I saw was that patients that were put on medication didn't necessarily do that well. They may do well at the beginning, but after a while, the side effects become worse than the positive effects. And then eventually they will all stop working. And then you have to increase the dose or add another prescription, and then you add the new side effects. And meanwhile, somewhere in there, the individual gets lost. And I seriously mean this. I mean, people complain about chemical brain because they've lost attachment to themselves. They've lost connection to themselves. I mean, I remember one woman was telling me that she had been at her mother's funeral and couldn't cry because she was on Prozac. Now that's crazy, because she knew she was sad, but she couldn't get the feelings, the true feelings, because she was sedated in a way with Prozac. She'd been on it already. She wasn't on it particularly because her mother had passed away. And so her brain was chemicalized. And once she got off the Prozac with my help, and that's possible, she began to have feelings. She began to have higher highs, lower lows, and feel normal and natural. And she was just so excited to have herself back again.
This is such a powerful point that you're bringing up, and one of the terms that came up in my mind is this concept of dehumanizing, and it feels like from what you're saying that the pharmaceutical model and the psychiatric medicine model as the only model for prescribing a solution for whatever chemical imbalance or interpersonal issue or anxiety or depression or whatever the case may be. There seems to be this numbing and tranquilizing effect that dehumanizes the person from actually feeling their feelings. And we do know, energetically and based on Taoist Chinese medicine and all the great wisdom teachings and healing teachings, that the emotions that get repressed and imprinted into the body and don't get expressed can contribute to devastating health consequences.
That's absolutely right. Everything from post-traumatic stress disorder, which goes into the energy field, and we carry it, and then it is expressed as symptoms. There was a study some years ago by Dr. Folletti, which indicated that all the patients that he had evaluated that had obesity, chronic fatigue syndrome, and other chronic issues had had childhood trauma. And it wasn't that everybody had had childhood trauma. Well, everyone has childhood trauma, so you're going to get a percentage. It's not that. It was, and actually, it was the ACEs study. Very, very well done, very well controlled, and it was clear that that sets you up for having these illnesses. So even though I'm treating, if I'm treating chronic fatigue syndrome or treating depression with supplements, with nutrition, I'm also very aware that you have to have the upstream solution, which is to deal with the post-traumatic stress disorder, with whatever is sitting in your energy field as well. And, I like to start, I tend to start with the physical, because sometimes you have to. If someone's on medication, you want to give them some supplements to help them get off the medication. You want to kind of free up their body and their brain. Then you can begin to address some of the trauma, and then the rest of the work becomes a lot easier. And again, people are reclaiming themselves.
And that's so powerful. I find that so much of the healing process, whatever the condition or the circumstance may be, so much of it is actually about the underlining hero's journey that comes along from it. And that might just be kind of a soul encryption that comes along with these physical bodies that we get incarnated with. But like, there's something about the journey,
right?
And finding ourselves all over again. And sometimes we lose ourselves. And I'm curious what your perspective on that is, because there's this like overarching existential angst and anxiety and depression and definitely among people in the spiritual community in particular. And I notice these things and these nuances, and I'm always wondering, like, A, like, what's that really about? What's kind of going on there? And then B, in the society we live in a society that doesn't foster that hero's journey. It doesn't foster the reclaiming of sovereignty and reclaiming of the human being at another level of experience. And so a lot of people are walking around aimless or walking around lost, and they're not sure how to reclaim themselves, if they even are aware that that's part of the process.
If they're even aware. I mean, that, what you're talking about really is the numbing of society. Absolutely. The people that are already asking the questions, it's like, wow, they're asking the question, how do I get out of this angst? What is it? The Buddha say life is suffering. Well, yes and no. If you have an MTHFR issue, you're not methylating properly, you're going to have a lot of angst. And when you get some methylfolate and methyl B12, your angst will get a lot better. Is that existential angst? I don't think so. I think it's a B vitamin issue. So it's very concrete. That's one thing. The other thing is that the masses are being totally tranquilized by the addictive food, alcohol, drugs, the opioid epidemic, which is run by the pharmaceutical industry, and on and on. I mean, we have a mess. We have a mess on our hands because people are not living an authentic life. They're not able to live an authentic life. They're not able, I mean, people can't even diet properly, quote diet, but lose weight and give up the foods they know they ought to give up, like sugar, white flour, things that are not particularly good for them because they're so addictive, and the brain just goes, I want it, I gotta have it. And of course the food industry knows this and creates it. I mean, it's the same as the cigarette industry. The tobacco industry finally got nailed. It hasn't stopped the smoking issue, but it's gotten a lot better. Same thing with the food industry. However, I'm heartened by the increase in organic food and the availability of organic food. There's also an issue on the other side that Trump has been trying to delegislate a lot of the legislation we already have in place to protect the consumer from bad food. So he's undoing a lot of big gains that were made in previous regimes. So it's a real problem.
Wow. Wow. There's so much in that. I actually was not aware of that particular detail. That is a little bit frightening, and kind of pushes me, and I mean, I'm sure you and many other people that are doing this work to work probably even harder and to fight a little bit harder for our rights, for our freedom, and for the health and well-being of people of the world. And with that said, you create a very really beautiful segue, because I want to discuss this concept that you coined in your new book, this concept of the addicted brain. And what exactly does that mean?
Yeah.
For a society of overstimulation, information overload, dopaminergic and serotonin stimulating crutches and substances, like you mentioned, a highly contaminated global food supply, and basically trying to defend ourselves against weapons of mass distraction. So that's
Right. Thank you. Yeah, this is what it looks like. This is the cover. If you can see it without reflection. It's called The Addicted Brain and How to Break Free. It's on my website, cassmd.com. Anyway, I wrote that because people don't understand that addiction is not about white knuckling it. It's not about being morally weak or stupid, or if you just had control. It's like, it's not that way. What happens is when you have a feeling, when you have an attraction to eat something, smoke something, ingest some sort of a inebriant, your brain it has been hijacked. That substance hijacks your brain. You no longer have a prefrontal cortex that can make the decision that says, no, that's not a good idea. It doesn't exist. It's not, gee, I shouldn't, I don't know. It goes, because what happens is you go into a very primitive, gotta have it survival mode. And when you gotta have it and you're in survival, what happens when we're in survival? We're going to fight or flight, actually. And when you're running from a lion or tiger or the things that we used to run from, you're not thinking, well, should I really run? Is he really going to get me? And, oh, I had this other thing I wanted to do. You don't do that. You run like hell, right? If a car's coming at you, you just jump out of the way. You don't think. This is what happens. There are triggers. And there's triggers in the food supply. There's triggers when addicts see another addict shooting up, for example. Many, many triggers. When that trigger happens, your brain becomes hijacked and you cannot do anything about it. So how to prevent this? This is the point. So, of course, in addiction treatment, one of the things we do is help to remove triggers. We do this in a behavior modification way. But on a pure physiological, physical way, if someone is always having a dopamine need, it's called reward deficiency syndrome. They need to do something. When they're little boys, they climb trees and jump off roofs and do terrible things that scare their mothers because it gets them a dopamine rush. These are the little boys that are ADD because they're low in dopamine or they don't have enough dopamine stimulation. Cell phones. And video games, very much a dopaminergic issue. So you're not thinking, well, it's not a good idea to do this. It just feels really good. Rats will die pressing a button to get for that stimulation, for that reward. So what do we do? Here's the question and here's the answer. We actually supply dopamine to the brain. Instead of waiting for you to get triggered by that external that is not good for you, we actually supply raw materials like tyrosine, phenylalanine, and the B vitamins, magnesium, vitamin C. This is the recipe to make dopamine. So by supplying, sometimes one is missing, sometimes it's the B vitamins missing, sometimes it's the actual tyrosine missing, whatever it is. So I actually supply it in supplements. For example, it's so interesting. I created this product called Focus that has in it, it says supports mental clarity, alertness, and positive mood. What it does is it enhances your dopamine. And what does it have in it? It has phenylalanine, tyrosine, and B vitamins, and a few other things that are cofactors to help make the dopamine that you're craving. So if your brain has enough dopamine, it's happy, it's good. So it's not going to be running after every single dopamine stimulation. And it really makes a difference. So even with ADD kids, we give them some Focus, or the ingredients that are in Focus. It doesn't have to be my product. There are other, you can buy the separate ones. By the way, I made a number of formulas because after I wrote Natural Highs, people were taking a lot of separate nutrients. Yeah. And although they appreciated being able to take them and know what to take them, they also complained a little like, oh, it's a lot of stuff to take. So, I know what, I'll make it easy. So I put together these formulas. So when you take something like Focus or tyrosine or phenylalanine, you're not going to be so much at the effect of these external stimulations because you got it handled. You're more like a normal, quote, normal person who doesn't get addicted. They're exposed to all the same stuff, siblings in the same family. They'll have the same upbringing, the same exposures, the same diet, but they'll be different because their genetics are different. So what we do is we help the genetics along and this is the epigenetic relationship. Genetics are what you're born with, but epigenetics is the expression of your genes, and we can change them by what we eat, how we live, how we deal with stress, the nutrients we take, and so on. So we have a lot of ways of fixing what's missing, and that's what I do. So it's a process. So to get someone off an addicted substance, I start to give them what they need before even taking away the substance that they shouldn't be doing, whether it's sugar, cocaine, alcohol, and it really makes it a much easier process and more successful.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I love this work, and that's why I really value your work, because you really look at it multidimensionally, and you have a very, very good, very great understanding of how to deal with the machinery, with the actual physiology and the neuro.
Right. You're right.
It's like, it's such an easily convoluted thing, especially with these micro fractured communities and YouTube and people that are more like spiritually inclined. So it's like, it's all spirit, it's all energy. There's no food and supplements.
It's your belief system, and that's
and that's it. But it's like, Michael Bernard Beckwith is a personal mentor of mine, and I've spoken at Agape in LA probably about 4 times over the years. And one of the reasons they have me come in sometimes is because I drive the food message and its connection to what's going on up here, and I just tell them, like, hey, look, it's hard to be in an attitude of gratitude if your body is breaking down and you're in physical and your brain's not working, physical pain, and your brain's not working.
You're feeling like crap. You're not going to be grateful.
It's really challenging at best, right? So that's why I love this. And one of the things you mentioned I thought was because I had never heard this term before, reward deficiency syndrome. That really caught my attention, because I thought about I guess from an archetypical developmental psychology level of looking at the inner child, right? And I thought about whoa, okay, wait a minute, what is, because I get the texting and the Facebook likes and the sugar and that kind of reward syndrome, but I'm wondering, as a psychiatrist, do you have any insights about the interpersonal kind of how that plays out from somebody, whether it's the context of someone's inner child or whatever's driving those behaviors?
Well, backing up to specifically reward deficiency syndrome was coined by a scientist, Ken Blum, I think it was in the 70s. And he did a study showing that when people who were ADD or addicted, particularly to alcohol, they had a specific genetic variation. And when these people were given the things I was telling you about, like tyrosine, phenylalanine, and B vitamins, it neutralized it. So it's actually something you're born with, but it can also be early stress. Early stress can lead you to shut down some of those receptors. So whether you get it from birth, from trauma, from whatever it is, we don't really have to know every single detail about why, but what we know works, at least on the physical level, is to restore what's needed. Then we can go back, and if there was early trauma, start to deal with it. And there's some beautiful methods. There's tapping, there's EMDR, there's sensory experiencing, and many other, and there's many spiritual ways of doing it. What you do is you interface with the body's energy field, either with a therapist who knows how to do this, spiritual teacher, whatever, and help to, it's like rearranging the energy field and realigning you with who you really can be, and getting the extra stuff out of the way, the traumas, the bad messages, the abusive messages that many children get, and reconnect people with their wholeness. So I'm dealing with physical wholeness, spiritual wholeness, emotional wholeness. So we need it on all levels. And how you interface, where you start, I don't know if it really matters. I know where I start, but it doesn't matter. And people can have instant healings too. So that's a whole other issue.
Right. Yeah. There is this X factor, right? There is this spontaneous healing phenomena, which it's kind of like, it seems like, from what I'm hearing, everybody ultimately has their own unique journey, and how one person gets in the door may not be the same as the other. But the point of the matter is that you just get in the door, right? You're willing, and you take a courageous
right.
you move
Yeah.
forward, and you learn about yourself, and you learn about what you need. But also on top of that, what I also know to be true because of my work in the nutrition field, and from what you just said, is that it's significantly easier to do that deeper work, and that whatever the interpersonal developmental work, it's significantly easier if this thing is firing on all cylinder, and you get
the machine. Yeah.
your cognition's working, and you just feel balanced as a human being, as a physical being. It's significantly easier to do any of that other work. But if we are burnt out, if we are emotionally distressed, and we have relationship problems, which I definitely understand and been through, and we're kind of going through the dark night or the dark years of the soul, as the case may be, for some people. And it's very easy to exhaust our neurotransmitters and our neurological bandwidth and capacity, right? And so this is what I wanted to lean into, and you kind of answered a lot of it too, but I want to kind of rephrase the question in case any new things come up. And it's basically around what I just said, which is, if somebody's really, their physical brain is really worn out, it's got deficiencies, it's basically breaking down to, let's call it various,
the circuits aren't working.
The circuits are not firing, and their capacity and bandwidth to process life and just the varying circumstances of life. If somebody is in a situation like that, is it pretty much what you already said, or is there additional tools or insights that you help people get started with?
Great question. But basically, you're talking about a depletion situation. And people may not even recognize that they're depleted. They don't know, they don't have a label for it. But what I always encourage people to do, and I think you do too, is eat well. Eat organically, drink water, have sufficient protein. If you're vegan, then you have to make sure your protein source is happening and you're getting enough also B12 and taurine. So there's some other things to watch out for. But you need essential fatty acids, basically, and not to go to extremes. I think the extremes of dieting can have their own pitfalls. So nourish and nurture your body. Exercise, sleep. Sleep's very important because it restores our brain and our body. But a lot happens at night. So don't try to skimp on sleep. So all of these things are going to help to restore that burnt out, stressed being. And then you also need extra amino acids very often. So if you're, for example, if you're anxious and depressed, can't sleep, tend to crave carbs, you're probably low in serotonin. And what do you do for low serotonin? Well, out there in the regular pharma world, it's an SSRI, it's a Prozac, Zoloft, Lexapro, Celexa. In my world, it's let's take something that creates your own serotonin. So let's have 5-hydroxytryptophan or tryptophan together with some B6, B12, and some other cofactors. And lo and behold, your brilliant brain makes serotonin. This is so cool. We have miracles going on, like trillions of them all day long. This is our bodies, our brains, our minds, our gut. Brilliant. I was doing some work recently with a probiotic. It's a probiotic that we know that there's certain bugs in the microbiome that actually will change our mood. And there are companies that put it together. There was one that I gave a talk for recently. And the research shows that people who are taking this after a month notice that their mood is better. It's more even. They're not as reactive. They're happier. Now, how can that be? You take probiotics in your gut and then your brain's happy? What? This is crazy. But there is an incredibly intimate connection between what's in our gut and what our brain is doing. So if you have an inflamed gut and you have insufficient amount of the right probiotics, you're going to have an inflamed brain. If you have a healthy gut without a leaky gut, when it's intact, you're eating the right foods. And by the way, gluten tends to cause leaky gut and brain inflammation. But when you have that all under control, then your brain is happy. It's not inflamed. So you have a happy gut. If you have a happy gut, you have a happy brain, pretty much. So that's my little probiotic story.
Yeah, well, no, I appreciate you bringing that up, because I was actually going to ask if you did any work in the microbiome realm. And, it's such an incredible discovery. It's such an incredible body of research that I think has only really scratched the surface of how dug down deep it really is. What we do know is 80% or more of your immune system is produced in the microbiome. 80% or more of serotonin is actually produced in the microbiome, not intrinsically just in the brain, which is
not in the brain, right?
Such a huge shift from what we thought it was. And kind of the pharmaceutical model is basically, in the form of SSRIs or something, it's basically trying to indicate, or it's coming from that logic of oh, well, it's just in the brain. It's just the neurotransmission and of the functions in the brain, or the neurological system, but it doesn't have anything to do with the gut, doesn't have anything to do with the food we're eating, or the toxicity, or the glyphosate, or the wheat, or yada, 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 that might be affecting our ability to digest, assimilate, and absorb nutrients. Won't have anything to do with that. But of course, as we find out, it actually does. And I'm really happy that you brought that up, because one of the things you mentioned that I wanted to just piggyback on and obviously see if there's any other unique insights that come from it. But one of the things one of my friends reflected back to me a couple of years ago, he's just one of these very undercover research kind of hermit type of people. You wouldn't know him unless you came across him in some health food store or something. And so I'm getting into a conversation with him, and he tells me about this new research. I don't know where he's finding this stuff, but he just told me about this new research he found out. He's like, oh yeah, you know why people have tobacco issues? It's not just the oral fixation. It actually changes the bacterial strain. There's a pleomorphic transformation that some of the bacteria in your microbiome actually transform, and then they cause the host, the person, to actually crave the tobacco, or to actually crave the sugar. It's so basically there's certain opportunistic organisms that if given the opportunity, they will use the person like a remote control. And so it's not always like that we have a sugar craving or a cigarette craving. It's something inside of us may actually have a craving.
Oh, totally. It's funny when I've explained to people when they have yeast or candida, and there are many other yeasts besides candida, but that seems to be a common one. So I tell them, I said, your lab test, and I do lab tests. The lab test shows that you have candida, and your sugar cravings aren't really your fault. You have these bugs in your gut, these yeasts that are saying, feed me sugar, feed me sugar. And you become a slave to them. So what we need to do is actually starve them out, because if you stop eating sugar, and that's where you need a little willpower, stop eating sugar, they will be starved out, and you can eliminate the candida. I'll also add in a certain amount of herbs. There's a candida formula that I like. There's several on the market, and they will help to get rid of the yeast. And then you also put in some good probiotics to replace the bad guys.
Right.
So you always want to help as much as you can to restore the gut microbiome, to make it happy. It's 4 or 5 pounds of, it's amazing. There's 4 or 5 pounds of microbiome in us, in our gut, in our whole body, on top of the surface of our body, in our mouth, and everywhere there's this microbiome, and these are our friends. And what's crazy is that and still do, think, oh, we have to live in a sterile environment. We have to kill all the bugs. We need to be on antibiotics. We need to use stuff on our hands to kill the bugs. And then our children are growing up, and what happens? They get all these allergies because their immune systems have no idea how to recognize friend from foe, because they haven't had any practice. They haven't eaten enough dirt. I don't know, as a kid, my father used to say, you're going to eat a bushel of dirt by the time, in your lifetime. You might as well start now. He was very cool. He was a doctor, but very practical. And he said, yeah, eat dirt. It's fine. I mean, we didn't eat dirt, but we ate things that fell on the floor, and I didn't hear the word germ. It's so funny. I didn't hear the word germ till I was in school. And people were talking about germs. I said, Daddy, what's germs? Because we didn't talk about germs. It was like, it didn't matter. And we actually grew up quite healthy, and we all had measles and mumps and all the other good childhood diseases that now have been told that they're very dangerous and very bad, and we need to be vaccinated against them. And that's a whole other story. I can go very far afield here. Getting back to the microbiome, the cells of the microbiome actually outnumber us, and they are really probably bossing us around. They're telling us what to do. So you really want to have allies there. You don't want to have the bad guys that are going to make you smoke and eat sugar.
Yeah.
You want to have the good guys who appreciate fiber and the good food. And that reminds me, eat a lot of fiber. Your microbiome needs it.
Yes, I mean, so many great points. One of the things that I thought was particularly insightful was this idea that it's not just enough to starve out the organism, if you will, but you have to repopulate the biological garden, right? That's the microbiome. It's your internal garden. It's like a relationship, right? You gotta take care of it. You gotta water it. You gotta do the consistent things to nurture the relationship. But you got to have a relationship with your own garden, right? And you got to take care of it. And these organisms, the probiotics, like you mentioned, the prebiotics and the fiber, this is helping to fertilize and enrich the soil within the microbiome, so it becomes capable of doing what it's designed to do. The immune system is designed to ward off foreign organisms and invasive invaders, right? But if the microbiome is down and we're not taking care of it with the probiotics and replacing out if you want to call it the bad guys, then it's just going to be constant work and maintenance, but it's not really going to get to that that sweet spot that we want to get to.
Well, it's kind of like pulling the weeds, but then you're not actually fertilizing the soil. And in this case, we fertilize a lot with prebiotics. I'm glad you mentioned that. Things like fiber, fermented foods, very important, because so many cultures have fermented foods. We don't. Why not? The only sauerkraut we see is in a Reuben, I think. We need kimchi, sauerkraut, all the different fermented foods. And I happen to really like them. So you should really accompany all meals with a little bit of fermented food. And that's going to help digest, help support your microbiome.
I love taking.
And then and you'll be happier. I mean, you'll be happier when you have a happy microbiome. As I said earlier, with the it was called Target GBX. Sounds very futuristic. Target GBX is the mood enhancing probiotic that I was actually talking about.
Okay.
So that's a new addition.
Oh, awesome! Is that part of your product line?
No, but I'm going to put it up on my website. It's not my own. It's done by a very respected older lab called Claire Lab. It's Klaire. That's been around for 30, 40 years. Really good traditional lab, but really keeps up with the science and keeps growing and expanding and doing more things like how do you change your mood with the probiotic. So very innovative.
That's amazing. One of the things that I also wanted to piggyback on what you were talking about, this conversation about the microbiome is obviously infinite, but you made a very important distinction, is that I was focusing on the microbiome as if it was just in the gut, but it's actually this internal kind of and external as well. It's all over us. It's literally, like you said, it outcompetes our human cells 9 to 1 or 10 to 1. Something like that. Something crazy. We're basically just like bacteria in meat suits with in a bone skeletal structure and a nervous system. It's pretty outrageous. But the point of that was that you mentioned sterilization, and the whole pasteurization theory and all the different things that's kind of created, and this whole culture of antibioticizing things. And when I find it so ironic, and it's sad, but it's so ironic that the one place, a hospital, that's the most sterilized is probably the most dangerous place to really spend your time, because now what we're finding out because of the hyper sterilization is like superbugs, like antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria.
Oh boy.
They're getting so sophisticated that they're actually able to manipulate themselves to resist the antibiotics. So now they're trying to create stronger antibiotics. It's like the pattern, like it just doesn't end.
Yeah, but they know that it's not going to work. And by the way, we're ingesting antibiotics every day in our food supply if we're not careful. All our food all our meats contain antibiotics unless you're eating organically. So you have to be very, very careful. And that if you're ingesting antibiotics, you're actually killing some of your good bugs. So that's not a very nice thing to be doing. And then there's arsenic in chicken, by the way, and in rice. All I'm saying, eat organically, because you can avoid a lot of the bad stuff that way.
Yeah,
I thought I'd throw that in.
Oh, absolutely. That's essential. And, in our food supply, not to harp on it, but our food supply largely has been used as a deliberate weapon system. And, and we can go down that rabbit hole for a day or more.
Yes.
It's really about solutions. Obviously, we're just kind of pointing this stuff out so we can get to what the solutions are. And as far as the sterilization aspect goes, we talked about probiotics and prebiotics. Is there anything else that you would recommend for people if they want to kind of get out of artificially sterilizing themselves, but they want to do it in a way that isn't a detriment?
Well, I had mentioned fermented foods and fiber. I mean, is that along the lines that you were thinking?
Yeah, or even like cosmetics and lifestyle and what we put on our skin and.
Oh, like that. Oh, please. I think the Environmental Working Group, EWG.org, is a good place to start, because there's so many toxins. When I look at, in hotel rooms, I travel a lot, I go to a lot of conferences, I look at the ingredients on the hand lotions, and some of them will say, that they have like ginger, or, it makes it sound like, oh, it's herbal, it's holistic, it's healthy. Oh, God, no, there's like parabens and those nasty things, and you're putting that in your skin, and your skin, it absorbs everything, and you're in trouble. Lipstick contains lead, for heaven's sake. Lead is highly toxic. It's a very toxic metal. I mean, we're totally in trouble. So please, cosmetics, household goods, oh my, all the household cleaners, laundry detergents. Well, I'm particularly sensitive to all this. So when I get near the smell of these things, I really can feel it. So I'm not too good with chemicals. And most people don't smell them. So they're just immune to them, but they're not really immune. Their body is really being affected and they don't know it. So these are stealth weapons, all the chemicals that we are exposed to. When I see the chemicals babies are exposed to, like when people have a new baby, they'll put in a new carpet and new bedding, new mattress. And parents who were uneducated don't wash everything first. I mean, people are told to wash things before their new baby's in touch with them, they're in contact with them. But you can't really wash a mattress. And carpet, forget. Don't use that carpet, because carpet is full of chemicals.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or use organic kinds of carpet, or I can ramble on forever, so you got to stop me.
No, this is so essential, because this is the stuff that goes unnoticed. The volatile organic compounds coming off our paint and our walls and our carpets and mattresses, etc., etc. Like, this is the stealth weapon. Like this, because
And the foam beds. Oh my God.
Oh yeah, and just like in the phones. And I mean, this is the stuff it's like telling a fish about water, right? Because it's literally right there. Food, it's like people like,
what water?
it's like the food thing is like, okay, that I get that, because that's tangible. I can touch it, I eat it, I interface with it every moment of every day. That's obvious, right? But then this is the next level of like awakening and coming to consciousness about the toxicity in our environment. And I think basically I wanted to drive that in, because it's a continual upgrade, right? Like to reclaim ourselves, to take it back to that level that we started with.
Exactly. Yeah. Because we started off talking about getting yourself off antidepressants and off medications, and now we're talking about getting yourself off all the environmental things, like what's in our food and our water and so on and so on. And if we don't do that, then we're going to have the same depression, anxiety, difficulty sleeping. I mean, all of these chemicals are making a negative impact on us. EMFs, people who have difficulty sleeping are sometimes being affected by EMFs. Some people are sleeping with their cell phones. Oh my God. My mother didn't warn me not to sleep with the cell phone. She said, just don't sleep with bad people. But not really. But you shouldn't take your cell phone to bed, or put it, if you have to use it as an alarm, like when you're traveling, maybe you put it on your airplane mode, so it's not pinging all the time, and preferably not plugged in, because the energy from the plug is affecting you as well. So all these things, I mean, people think I'm kind of like out there when I talk about all these things. I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to do it, because I don't usually, get to be on my soapbox, but I really appreciate it. So thank you. Something else, I guess I'm going to add something that I haven't mentioned, and that is something I'm using a lot in my practice now, is CBD, which is cannabidiol. And I'm using that for anxiety, depression, and insomnia, and also for addiction. I treat a lot of addiction. So it's kind of ironic, because CBD is from the cannabis plant, but it's the non-high part, the non-THC part of the plant. THC is just one of the cannabinoids. So cannabidiol is one, and there are a whole lot of other ones that work together synergistically that really feed us, that give us, feed our endocannabinoid system, which has been actually starving for quite a while.
I was about to, the moment you said that, the endocannabinoid system, I was about to ask about your insight on the endocannabinoid system, because one of the deeper I got into that field, I found out that your endocannabinoid system, you almost have as many receptors, like CBD receptors on the body, as you do vitamin D3 receptors. I don't know if that's totally accurate, but that's something that I kind of, I was told or found out. And I'm just curious now that you mentioned that, because most people have never even heard that word. They've heard CBD or pot or cannabis or whatever, but they don't actually know that this molecule in this plant has an intrinsic kind of connection to our biology.
It's exactly right. In what was it, in the 1960s, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam in Israel discovered anandamide. And anandamide is or maybe it was 1992. I'm sorry, now I have to get my years straight. In any case, he discovered anandamide, and anandamide is the molecule in THC that makes people feel good. And he figured, well, if we have a receptor, if we have anandamide, we have receptor, if we have something external like pot that does this, we should have something endogenous. And that was it. That was in 92 when he discovered that we do have our own internal pot or CBD, or it's a whole system.
Yeah.
So he discovered anandamide, he discovered the endocannabinoid system, and realized that we need this. We have receptors all over the body, all over the brain. We have in the immune system. It does so many different things. It's an anti-inflammatory, a mood elevator, it's anti-anxiety, it helps with sleep. And you think, well, it's a panacea. This is crazy. How can it do all those things? And it's because it is an entire system. It's like a modulator. It helps to modulate all these different systems, and it's a communicator. So just like we have our hormones that are communicating all over the body, our thyroid hormone, there are receptors for thyroid hormone all over the body, in the brain, and the liver, and just everywhere. And by the same token, there are receptors all over the body for the whole endocannabinoid system. And when we can feed it properly, we get results. We get a kind of feeling of, first of all, feelings of feeling good, feeling content, without the high, because THC does create a kind of a stone feeling. And there are actually a lot of people who don't like that feeling. I'm one of them. And people often who were prescribed THC or THC compounds for situations like cancer did it because it helped with their appetite and so on, but they didn't like the stony effect. Well, now we have all kinds of CBD compounds that don't cause the stone feeling. So if you want to get stoned, that's your choice. But we can have really good results, and actually in some ways better results, with pure CBD or the cannabinoids that are in the plant that work synergistically.
Yeah, well, this is a geek out moment right here. I have my own little soapbox, and I think this is I'm so glad that you brought this up as a concluding kind of recommendation in a little bit of a research study, because CBD is so powerful, and it's so interesting to me just thinking of how there's some kind of like bond with this plant and the human being in our biology, and just like how much we've gravitated towards the plant. We've kind of like distorted it and disturbed it in many ways. But I thought about I was doing a lot of research a few years ago for a book that I'm still working on called The Hidden Messages in Chocolate. And it's a very deep exploration, and it goes into a lot of deep, nutritional sciences. And one of the things I came across was the connection between the anandamide molecule and the THC molecule. And what I found out is, there's a lot of people that smoke a lot of cannabis. A lot of them will say, well, we have THC receptors in the brain, and it's kind of like a validation. And what I found out is kind of ironic, is that we don't actually have THC receptors. We have CBD, like you mentioned. We don't have THC. We have anandamide. And if you look at the genetic profile, the DNA structure of anandamide and THC, and you match them next to each other, they're one DNA strand different. Everything else is almost identical. So I just thought about the use of THC-rich cannabis and bringing it back to the whole concept of the reward deficiency syndrome, and that's somehow having to do with anandamide. Anandamide is essentially the bliss chemical, right?
That's right. And you actually, that was good. That because in my readings about the endocannabinoid system and CBD, what I'm discovering is that even though we've been talking about the reward deficiency syndrome from Ken Blum based on the dopamine receptor, we're finding out that actually the endocannabinoid receptor is much bigger and has more receptors than the dopamine receptors. And so there's a lot of joy and bliss and reward that we get outside of dopamine, which is in the endocannabinoid system. So you actually did just bring it full circle. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, I'm happy to do that. That's one of those little details that's just in my head that I barely ever get the opportunity to break up.
Me either. No,
Yeah.
this has been really fun because I've gotten to talk about all my favorite things.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, I'm really happy that we went down a number of different tangentials and rabbit holes, and it all seemingly was all lined and all kind of lined up perfectly. And I would just like to, first of all, thank you so much for your time. I've been following your work for years, and it was a pleasure to meet you through our mutual friend Daniel Schmachtenberger at the Bulletproof Conference. I have your focus product because you gave me a bottle, and I love it. By the way, thank you so much. And,
Oh, you're welcome.
yeah, and I just wanted to say I'd love for everybody that's listening to know where your website is, where they can find more information. They can purchase your books, in particular your most recent book.
Totally. CassMD.com, CASSMD.com. And there's a free ebook you can get. So if you want to learn more about your brain, it's called Reclaim Your Brain. And it's a lot of what we've been talking about, the neurotransmitters and how you can enhance your neurotransmitter production, make them work more smoothly. So that's also on my website homepage. You just sign up for my newsletter and you get the free book. And the signing up for the newsletter is free too. So all free.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Cass. This has been an absolute pleasure. This has been extremely fun for me. And I just really appreciate your time.
Likewise. Thank you.